a horrifyingly sterile package, all method and no madness, perfectly hollow and bland rock music.
What do they know? They hated Led Zeppelin too, right? I mean,
Hi everybody, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and this is going to be another installment in my series Revisiting, where I look back on a particularly significant album in my musical life and journey. And today, once more, I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest to the channel for the first time. We have Tommy Burton from Tommy's Musical Adventures. Hi, Tommy.
hi, James. It's good to be here. It's great to finally chat in person, so to speak, in person over the internet. You know what I mean.
Yeah, so Tommy and I have been commenting on each other's videos for many years now, but this is the first time we've actually ever encountered, I won't say in the flesh, but I'm not sure how you describe it, on a screen. So we're going to talk about an album which I know is very special to you, Tommy, and a band, in fact, which you like and love dearly. So we're going to be talking about, I guess we should hold it up now. I don't know if you've got your copy to hand. I've got my copy here. Out of the Blue. Yeah, ELO. This is an album that goes back in time for me, way back, and I imagine it does for you too. So let's start with that, Tommy. Do you want to share with us just your memories of this record, or how it came into your life? What significance does it play for you?
Back when I was younger and a lot dumber, I would say I was a big like hard rock, heavy metal guy. I did listen to some like what you would call college radio bands like REM. I was a music snob, so to speak. So more pretentious taste. I'll just leave it at that. Still love the Beatles, but the Traveling Wilburys was my introduction to Jeff. It was that guy from ELO. That's what I knew about Jeff Lynne at that point. Little did I know what an integral part of that group he was. And of course, in the early '90s, the Tom Petty hits, from Full Moon Fever and Free Falling. Those things were huge, but it really didn't register with me. I didn't love those records at the time. Um, and so fast forward to the mid 90s when the Beatles did Free as a Bird and Real Love, produced by Jeff Lynne, I was a little more aware, but I loved those tracks, particularly Real Love. And it sort of sent me on a journey to find out more about Jeff Lynne in particular. I knew the name, I knew what he was involved in, but I didn't know him or his music. And then I kind of went through the back door through the Beatles. Funny
Mm.
enough, the Beatles got me into Jeff Lynne, which a lot of people would say that's a reverse deal, that it starts with the Beatles and then into Jeff Lynne. But it was I guess maybe the same thing for me. It was Jeff Lynne because of his involvement with the reunion tracks. I thought he did magic with that, and then as I got into Jeff Lynne, that was it. It was by that time in my sort of musical life, it was hook, line, and sinker. I was gung ho, and so Out of the Blue, I think most people would say is the ELO album, commercially just most well known, and so that's how
Mm.
I got into that album.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that you'd done it that
Mhm.
way round.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for me, it was very different. I got into the pop charts in 1978, and
Mhm.
ELO, the first thing I saw by them on Top of the Pops was Wild West Hero. ELO is an interesting band for me because I never had their records as a kid. They were my dad's records. My dad was a big classical music fan, and he didn't really like a lot of pop and rock music, but the one band he quite liked was ELO because of all the classical strings and everything, and we would listen to my dad's classical records, his Rachmaninoff and his Liszt, and then he would play a couple of ELO tracks to sort of end the evening off as a bit of a sop to me, really, because I think he knew that I preferred things with a bit of a drum beat. So at the time, I wouldn't have heard Out of the Blue as an album. I would have just heard one or two songs at the end of an evening's listening. It was years before I finally sort of heard it all the way through for myself. And then a little bit later, when I started to get interested in playing the drums, I used to set some cushions up on the bed, the old classic thing. And I used to play along with this record because the drums are all very straightforward, very simple beats. And I basically learned to play the drums from, playing along to Out of the Blue on my bed.
Speaking about the drums, that's and we don't want to go all the way down that rabbit hole, but I mean with Jeff Lynne, from friends of mine that hated the new Beatles tracks, was like he made Ringo, one of the most unique drummers in the world, sound like ELO, which I love because I love that sound. But I could see where the critique would come in. I was like, well, what's wrong with that? Why wouldn't you want to do that? But it's an interesting story that the drumming got you into the band.
Maybe what we should do now is just look at the album and where it fits into their discography. I've got some notes here. It came out on October the 28th, 1977 in the UK. UK number 4, US number 4. So it didn't get to number 1 in either territory, but it was huge. 4 million advance orders. I think it went multi-platinum almost immediately. So this clearly, this was a huge release by a band that had been steadily growing, but then they'd kind of very quickly hit pay dirt, probably with the previous record in the States. New World Record had got to number 5 on the US Billboard chart, got to number 6 in the UK. So all of a sudden, ELO seemed to be this big thing, having been maybe not too much of a big thing for all that long, really. I think El Dorado was the first album that went gold in America, and that was only in 74. So we're talking quite a short space of time, and then they come along with this huge magnum opus.
And everything builds like with any band, but like El Dorado's that locked in. You hear it, you immediately know, recognize the sound, the production, the songs. It's like it's Jeff Lynne. He's in full control, and it's Jeff Lynne's ship, so to speak, to fly. And so it's interesting how it builds. They had hits. I know with classic rock radio, if that's any kind of judgment on where they stand, Out of the Blue is the pinnacle. It's like they climb the mountaintop and then they reach it with Out of the Blue. It's a double. It's any double album to me is kind of epic by definition, just because of the volume that's on the album. And so, but commercially, I think, yeah, the world tour, the touring, and just the exposure that they had at that point. I mean, it was a perfect storm, as it were. The build up, and then this massive hit record.
Well, I think Jeff Lynne always saw it as the apex of their career. And I think, in all honesty, he would probably have preferred to bring the curtain down after Out of the Blue, because I think he felt he'd taken it to its logical conclusion. From Face the Music, New World Record, a new slickness comes into the sound. It sounds very, very hi-fi now. I mean, it used to sound incredible on my dad's hi-fi speakers back in the 70s, because my dad was a hi-fi buff, so we used to listen to this stuff on his big speakers, and I could hear as a child that these productions were a step above some of the stuff I was listening to in my bedroom. You know, I was listening to things like the Boomtown Rats and Squeeze and Blondie, which were great, but then you'd hear Out of the Blue on a really good system, and it was almost like another level of studio expertise. You could kind of hear something's going on here. There's people here who really know how to record. Not so much maybe a live band, but they know how to put together a studio picture or a studio concoction, and maybe just the studio at Musicland and just the recording environment they had. I know Bev Bevan did all his drums in the toilet, which is interesting because they discovered there was a particularly great sort of, you know, acoustic resonance in there. So what's your take on that, just on the sound of Out of the Blue? It does seem to have something, doesn't it, a depth to it, which is kind of unique to itself, really.
Absolutely. And one of the interesting things that I noted about it, of course, like anything, as you start looking at it, it took 3 months to record that album, this epic double album. They went in the studio for 3 months. You think about that. Nowadays, it takes years to make it, sometimes a single. But I mean, for them to go in 3 months, that's sort of a testament to Jeff Lynne's. He was prolific as a writer to have the material to go into the studio and then to record it the way that it was recorded. And I mean, we're not talking about simple, like, it's not like Bob Dylan's first album where you're blowing on a harmonica and playing an acoustic guitar. There's strings, there's drums, there's synthesizers, guitars, I mean, vocals. As you mentioned, it's a hi-fi record. It's an audiophile quality record. The thing about that album is, aside from the singles, is that just listening to it's a complete piece. I find it fascinating that they were able to do that kind of work in a relatively short amount of time. It kind of boggles the mind. And of course, that goes back, to the music industry and how it's all set up and all of that stuff. But to go in with that kind of momentum, as it were, as we're talking about, they were climbing a mountain and say, okay, we're going to lay down these tracks and we're going to do it in a way that is, going to push the album over the top.
That's interesting because I know when Jeff started working with Tom Petty, Tom and George Harrison, in fact, they both said that the thing that stunned them most about his approach was how quickly he worked, because they were both used to maybe
Right.
a fair amount of agonizing in the studio, trying to get a sound, trying to work out arrangements. But Jeff would always come into the studio knowing exactly what the arrangement was, exactly what each part was going to be. So he could work very, very quickly. Now, this album,
Right.
like I think like most others he made from maybe about 75 onwards, he had basically demoed everything. He'd gone to this Swiss chalet, famously,
Hmm.
to write a double album. Now, the story was apparently record label wanted ELO to do a double live album at this point. I think it was coming off the back of the Peter Frampton live record, which had been huge. But of course, Jeff is not. He's not a live guy really,
Right.
or he wasn't back then anyway. He's kind of come round now, but back in those days, Jeff basically hated the road, and
Right.
so he reached a compromise with them and just said, no, 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 I'm not doing that, but I will do you a double studio album. So he went to a chalet in Switzerland. It's such a great story. He had a piano, a 4-track recorder, a couple of dustbin lids, really kind of lo-fi, and got terrible writer's block
That's
for
all you need.
got awful writer's block for weeks, couldn't come up with anything. And then the sun came up one day over the Swiss Alps. He looks out of the window and just immediately writes Mr. Blue Sky. And then
Hmm.
he then spends the next 2 weeks writing the rest of the record, works out all the parts, demos everything. They go into the studio and it's basically, right, you play this, you play that, you play this. 3 months later, bam, done. That's Jeff Lynne, isn't it? That's kind of who he is, really.
It is, and that's the mark of, I won't say genius. That's such a strong word, and it gets thrown around a lot. But I will say brilliance. Going back to Tom Petty, he famously said at one time with Brian Wilson that Brian, and I would say Brian is a genius. But Brian, would go into the studio with 15 to 20 musicians booked and lay out parts. And I love Tom's description. He saw or heard sound long before the sound was there. And
Mm.
so to go into a studio and to lay out the intricate arrangements of parts for these different musicians and to know kind of how they're going to fit together, it's a visionary approach to just know that, okay, I want this string arrangement here in this spot. And I guess that's the thing about Jeff Lynne. He is able to make these sort of, I guess, simple pop songs, if you want to call them that. I don't think there's a whole lot simple about ELO, but these sort of simplistic type of songs and make them complex, which again, that's the mark of brilliance from anybody who writes and arranges and produces music, and for him to be able to do that consistently, and he still does it. That's the crazy thing. He's not lost that ability, not even in the slightest.
And Jeff Lynne's interesting because most artists tend to maybe go quite tuneful and commercial early on and then try and work out a way of being experimental. Take Radiohead as a classic example. Even the Beatles, start out with some pop
Right.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
start out with some pop ditties and then later on try and do something else. Whereas Jeff Lynne did it the other way around. He did all the sort of weird, interesting, sort of wacky stuff first. But I always get I always got a sense that he wasn't really a fan of some of that stuff. And what he was trying to do was just write great 3-minute pop songs. The stuff got such heavy airplay and it kind of gets a little bit played out in people's conscience, I think. And maybe that's one of the reasons why ELO, they had a short fuse after that. And I think people got a bit tired of them because of all the hooks and all the commerciality. What's your take on that? Do you think that Out of the Blue, in a way, he didn't dig his own grave exactly, but he did he sort of painted himself into a pop corner and left himself with nowhere to go, really? Because how do you top these songs?
People love to tear down the things that they love in a way, if that makes sense. I mean, we can go through. There's all kinds of pop bands that have been hugely successful in the market commercially, hits, and then 2 or 3 years later, no one wants to hear it anymore. And Jeff Lynne's a great example of that. In the early '90s. Jeff Lynne was all over the radio from 89 to 92. If you listen to pop radio, you were listening to Jeff Lynne, Wilburys, the Roy Orbison stuff he did, the late Roy Orbison stuff, the Tom Petty stuff. I mean, just hit after hit after hit after hit. And then when he released Zoom 10 years later, we're talking a 10-year time period. No one cared. It's like no one wanted to hear, nobody wanted to touch that material. And of course, that gets into the whole thing. And so, about, like as you were saying, painting yourself into a corner, because I think at the time it was just again lightning in a bottle, as it were. It was just the right music at the right time, and people latched onto it. But people are fickle. I think casual people are fickle, and so it's easy to go, you know what, I'm tired of that sound. I don't want to hear it now. I've heard enough of it. But as you said, I mean, just about any song off the album could have been a single. I think they would have been massive hits. I mean, was Mr. Blue Sky recently voted like the happiest song of all time or something? Like, people hear that song, they react to it.
And that's interesting that the music has lasted, even though Jeff, I think, thought he was writing just hits for the day, things that you could tune into the radio. I don't think he thought of them as being these lasting things. I think he did want things to be almost just of the moment, you know, just great tunes that you could whistle, help you get through that day. And then, you know, tomorrow he's going to have another one for you. I think it's rather taken him by surprise that all these years later, he's still playing these songs and they're still loved. And that shows, I think, that despite what the critics said at the time, and just looking at this quote here from Rolling Stone, they said that the album was meticulously produced and performed, but totally uninteresting, a horrifyingly sterile package, all method and no madness, perfectly hollow and bland rock music.
What do they know? I mean, they hated Led Zeppelin too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I remember an old Rolling Stone album guy where they gave Sergeant Pepper 3 stars. It's like, and then they go back. I mean, you know, that's what's funny is like the critics supposedly know, but you know, I've said this before. Great art stands the test of time. I think now that 50 years later, I imagine Rolling Stone probably would would choke on that review, and they should.
What we thought we'd do is just pick 5 songs from this record that were not singles to see if we can back up the claim that they could have chosen another 5. Now, I've been a little bit perverse with this because a couple of my picks I don't think would have been big singles, but they are songs that I really like.
I'll preface this by saying, you know, in discussing this, the Concerto for a Rainy Day, that whole side, I mean, yeah. I mean, even though they weren't all singles, of course, Mr. Blue Sky being the only one of those, they go together for me. It's so I purposely did not pick anything from the concerto just because of that. I mean, easily Standing in the Rain or Summer and Lightning could have been on there, but I did not pick any of those tracks. So the first track I picked for my non-single favorite track from side one, Across the Border. It's just to make the perfect side one. And it may just be the intro to that song. Just, I love that intro and the way it builds. It's so perfect to me. And it may get a little hokey with the trumpets and all the stuff as the song gets into the song. But the intro alone is a 10-star, you know, absolute, like, that's why I picked Across the Border as my first one.
Yeah, it's on the list. It's on the list. So
go figure.
One interesting thing I think about this record is the previous 2 ELO albums both start with these great sort of epic tracks. So think of the opening of Tightrope on the New World Record, and then Fire on High, which opens up Face the Music, both incredibly epic. For some reason on this album, he chooses, even though Turn to Stone is a great pop song, it's not a great opener in the spirit of those ELO tracks. It just sort of fades in, doesn't it? And it's just, you know, chugging away.
Right.
Across the Border, if he'd opened with that song, that would have been more in keeping with that grand tradition of opening with some absolutely, you know, incredible opening. And it's got a great close as well, a big barrage of tom-toms with a big phasing effect on them. It really does give you a huge blood rush. And yeah, I always loved it. I just thought it was one of the most epic moments on the record for sure. And it's not one they've ever played live, as far as I know. It was never played live. I have no idea why, but there you go. Okay, so I'm going to go for one now, which I think probably wouldn't have been a hit single or even a single, but it's a song I've always really liked because it breaks the mold of the rest of the record a little bit in the way it sounds, and that is from side 4, Birmingham Blues, which it's kind of Jeff trying to be sort of rocky. It's got a bit of a Gershwin tribute thing going on, and I don't know, I just like the kind of earthiness of it, and it's got a great groove, and it's just a silly bit of fluff really towards the back end of the record, but it's just one that I've always really liked.
A good pick, and it's not on my list. So there's a difference there. But I did pick something from. I picked a couple of things from side 4, but my off the wall sort of pick, and sort of keeping in tradition with your off the wall pick, is even probably, I won't say more off the wall than Birmingham Blues, but the Whale. I just like it, just the instrumental. It just sounds good. I love the progression, and I love the keyboards. I'm a synth nut. I think that if I had my way, if I had like a lot of old analog synthesizers, I would probably be like a mad scientist or something, locked away in my room, like diddling on these little parts and with it and making it do what it does, and crazy hair and like bad teeth, and just, it would be bad. But the Whale was my sort of non-traditional, like, it probably wouldn't be a hit single, but I just love the track.
Well, I'm pleased to inform you it's on my list.
I love it.
This song really takes me back to being on holiday with my parents in Mallorca when I was about 15 or 16, and my father had brought along a Sonny Discman, and it was when these little machines had first been invented, or they were first on the market, and it was just an incredible little device with a little light, and I used to just clamp the headphones on, and the Whale, I don't know, just all those stereo effects at the start, you know, the thing going from headphone to headphone, and just all that kind of Whale song. It's almost a sort of Jeff Lynne trying to do new age, really. And again, it's him stepping outside the box a little bit. And I
Mhm.
think a bit like Birmingham Blues, it kind of shows his versatility. And I think it proves the critics wrong who just said this album was just the same thing over and over again. I think it definitely was a you know, a slight left turn. This is one that some people might not be surprised at, but it's on side 2, and it's probably the only genuine comedy song on the record, which gives you a clue as to what it is. So if I say Tarzan, you'll know what I'm talking about, and of course it's Jungle, which is
Yeah.
one of the songs that we always used to play. You know, I said at the start about having the listening sessions on my dad's hi-fi. After he'd played us a bit of Rachmaninoff or a bit of, you know, Beethoven or whatever, we'd have Jungle by ELO, and it just always sounded tremendous with those big jungle sounds at the end and this kind of lurching riff, which again slightly different from the rest of the record, a different feel. But yeah, I mean, it's just a great. It's not a great song, but it's a great track.
I agree with you. It's fun. It's my friend Ross and I, a friend of mine, Ross. We're big. We love Jeff Lynne, and that's a track that we always talk about. And when we talk about Out of the Blue, we talk about Jungle. So I'm glad it didn't make my list. I'm glad it made your list, because I'm glad we get to mention Jungle, because it's a fun track, and it's a. I think it's I think it's worthy of its love, just because, as you said, the big drums, just the way it sounds. It's, of course, we could talk about the way it sounds on just about every ELO track, but it's a good one. My next one is also from side 2, and it is, and I almost include it with the concerto, but because it's not a part of the concerto for a rainy day, but to me, it just, Stepping Out. It's just a great ballad. It's just, to me, it's just, it could have, I think it could have been a good hit single. But every time I listen to, I know Standing in the Rain is the big one, but Stepping Out kind of is like the I won't say the overture, but it's the precursor to it. And listening to it on CD, of course, it's a great sort of intro into the rainy day sounds and everything. And
Yeah, well, amazingly, it did not make my list, but obviously, objectively, it is a great song. I nearly had it in instead of Jungle, so in the end, Jungle went in instead of it, which is a bit silly, really. But I must admit, I did suspect he would put it in. I thought it would be very unlikely for one of us not to include Stepping Out, so I thought let's have Tommy choose that one, and I'll go for Jungle. Clearly a great track. So my last choice is pretty similar. This is the song which, for me, is the most mind-blowing song on the record, and I'll explain why that is. So you get the Concerto for a Rainy Day, which builds to this immense climax. You get the sort of "please turn it over" message at the end of side 3, and you're really left thinking, where on earth is he going to go from here? I mean, most people would have put the concerto on side 4. It seems logical to bring the album to a climax with Mr. Blue Sky, and you're left wondering, well, if that's the end of side 3, what on earth is going to happen on side 4? You turn it over, the needle goes down, and you get this song, Sweet is the Night, which is one of the best songs on the record. And you just think, this guy is on fire. I mean, to come out of the concerto and go into Sweet is the Night, which I think is one of his greatest pop ballads, it's so feel good. And it's almost got a funky feel to it, which is what I like. As far as Bev Bevan can do funk, I mean, he's not going to be Ziggy Modeliste anytime soon, but it does have a slightly kind of funky feel to it. And just the chorus is so uplifting. When he sings "Everything is all right, it's all right" at the end, it's just hair raising. Brilliant track. And I just think the way it's positioned on the record after the grand finale of Mr. Blue Sky, let's have another fantastic song coming after that. And I mean, to me, it's just mind blowing.
And it's on my list as well.
Hey!
So I mean, how could it not be? I mean, it's a song that if you played for anyone that was not familiar with the album and the singles and the hits, they would, I think it would be a natural thing to think this is a huge hit song. It as far as quality, commerciality, catchiness, all the things that make a great hit single, Sweet as the Night has it. It's also Sean Sloan's favorite track. My friend Sean, hi Sean,
Hi,
he
Sean.
loves that track as well. And so it's great that, I mean, we could not do a list of non-singles from Out of the Blue and not include Sweet as the Night. Like you said, it's the only way you're going to come out of the concerto with something maybe even more grand, bigger, to say, you know what, this album's not over yet. We've still got plenty more to go. And another track for me was Night in the City, which I had on my list
Right.
so not, and again, side 2, the opening track, it's, you know, it's just one of those epic ELO, just big bump, 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 those big moments. And it just fits right into the aesthetic. Again, I think maybe not a major hit, but as a song, I think had it been released as a single, probably would have done okay. But you could probably say that about 90% of this album, if not more.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we did coincide a little bit, but not completely. So I guess we can sort of wrap things up a little bit now, and just say, I guess we kind of said it all already. This was the defining moment for the band. Kind of all downhill from here, although there was still some good songs to come. The next album, Discovery, had some pop gems on it.
For someone that's never heard ELO and says, what is ELO all about? I would point them to this album because it is I won't say it's my favorite, and I can't really pick favorites, but I can say that if you were to introduce somebody to Jeff Lynne and his musical world, I think Out of the Blue is definitely the go-to.
Sure. Just before we finish, just want to show off my my blue vinyl version of it, which was given to me a while ago by a friend who was giving away all his records. He said, "Do you want my blue copy of Out of the Blue?" And I said, "Yes, please." Unfortunately, it did not come though with all the spaceship, you know, make your own spaceship things, which was a bit disappointing. But are you going to unveil it? Hey, fantastic! Well,
And of course the topper, I have it off, but yes, I tracked down a copy. Specifically, I've only seen one ever, and I bought it. And lo and behold, I ripped it out and put it together because, you know, that's what it was meant to be for. So
superb, superb. Okay, well, on that note, Tommy, thank you very much for joining me for this epic discussion of an epic album. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me for that. Really enjoyed it.
thank you, James. I enjoyed it as well. We've got to do some more of these types of videos. I like these discussions.
Definitely. All right, folks. Well, leave some comments below. Let us know what you think of this record. I know this album has its admirers and its detractors, so let loose, don't hold back. And hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.